When I first told people I was opening a coffee shop, most of them didn't take me seriously. They smiled politely, nodded their heads, and then laughed as soon as I walked away. To them, it was just another silly dream the kind people have when they're tired of working dead-end jobs but don't really know what they're doing next. Maybe they were right about that last part. I didn't know what I was doing. All I knew was that I couldn't keep living the same life anymore. For years, I worked as an office assistant in a small insurance firm. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't living either. My days blurred together answering phones, organizing spreadsheets, pretending to care about people's vacation plans while mine never existed. Every morning, I'd stop by a local coffee shop before work. It was my 5 minutes of peace. I loved watching the baristas move, the rhythm of it all, the hiss of the espresso machine, the smell of roasted beans that made even bad days a little better. Somewhere in that routine, a quiet idea started to take root. What if I made a space like this? Of course, dreams are cheap until you put a price tag on them. The moment I started running numbers, reality hit like a cold gust of wind. Rent was insane. Equipment costs were worse. Investors didn't exactly line up for a woman with no restaurant experience and barely 5 digits in her savings account. But I had one thing going for me: stubbornness. I wasn't ready to let go of this tiny, impossible dream. Then I found it a space so small it could barely fit a bathroom. It was an old storage unit tucked between a laundromat and a nail salon on a quiet street. Just 10 square meters. The landlord almost looked embarrassed showing it to me. But while he apologized for the cracked walls and peeling floor, I saw potential. I saw the heartbeat of something that could be mine. I spent nearly everything I had to rent it. My friends thought I'd lost it. "You're seriously opening a coffee shop in a closet?" one of them said once, but not to my face. I heard it through someone else. They laughed, rolled their eyes, called me the caffeine dreamer. I laughed too, at least on the outside. Inside, I was terrified. The first few weeks were brutal. The space needed everything: new paint, new flooring, new plumbing. I didn't have the money to hire help, so I did it myself. I watched YouTube tutorials on how to install shelves, learned how to use a drill, and painted the walls at midnight with a second-hand roller that kept shedding lint. I burned through savings faster than I expected, living off instant noodles and instant coffee, ironically. But there was something oddly liberating about it. Every scratch on my hands, every night I went home covered in paint, it was proof that this was real. For the first time in years, I was building something that belonged to me. When the shop finally opened, it was humble: a counter, 2 stools, a tiny espresso machine I'd bought secondhand, and a chalkboard menu with 5 items. I didn't even have a real sign at first, just a piece of cardboard taped to the window that said "Open." The first day, nobody came. The second day, one curious passerby bought a latte, said it was good, then left. I waited hours for someone else, but the door stayed shut. I remember going home that night with tears in my eyes. I told myself it was just the exhaustion, but deep down, it was fear. The kind that whispers maybe they were right about you. Still, I came back the next morning. I wiped the counter, polished the machine, and opened the door at 7 a.m. sharp. 1 customer turned into 2, then 3, then none again. The flow was unpredictable, a pattern of hope and disappointment. I tried not to count, but I did. Every cup mattered. What I didn't realize was that, slowly, people were starting to notice. A few locals would stop by on their way to work. A construction worker who liked his coffee strong. A teacher who said my pastries reminded her of home. I started remembering their orders, greeting them by name. The space began to feel less empty, but for every kind word, there were still the whispers. The same people who mocked me before still did, they just got quieter about it. Some would peek through the window and smirk. Others asked when I was going to get a real job. I learned to smile and say, "This is my real job." There was one afternoon I'll never forget. A sudden downpour hit the city. the kind that sends everyone running for cover. My tiny shop filled with the smell of rain and roasted beans. I made a fresh pot of drip coffee just because I loved the sound of it. For a moment, I stood behind the counter, listening to the storm and realizing this was happiness. Not success, not profit, just the quiet joy of being exactly where I wanted to be. It didn't last long. Bills don't care about feelings. Sales were still too low to cover rent, and I was starting to panic. I took odd jobs on weekends, baking for a friend's catering business just to make ends meet. I told myself if things didn't improve in 3 months, I'd close the shop. I even drafted the police notice, just in case. But something inside me refused to give up. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was madness. Or maybe it was that small voice that kept whispering, "Give it one more week." One morning, as I was cleaning the front window, I noticed a woman standing outside, taking photos of the shop. I didn't think much of it. People liked posting aesthetic cafes on Instagram. But that photo, that single post, changed everything. I didn't realize how much a single photo could change everything. The woman who took it, I found out later, was a local food blogger. She had a modest following, just a few thousand people, but her photos were beautiful. And her words carried warmth. She posted a shot of my tiny shop, the latte art on my wooden counter, the soft light spilling through the window. Her caption said something like, "The coziest hole in the wall, cafe in town. Homemade pastries, small space, big heart." The next morning, I walked to work like any other day. The air was crisp, the kind of quiet chill that smells like fresh rain and old pavement. When I turned the corner, my heart stopped for a second. There were people outside my door, not just one or two, but a line, an actual line. I thought maybe the laundromat was giving out free detergent. Then I saw it. They were waiting for me. My hands were shaking as I unlocked the door. The bell rang, and people poured in, chatting, smiling, ordering things I hadn't even finished writing on the menu yet. My espresso machine hissed like it had a life of its own. I made coffee after coffee, my brain spinning to keep up. At one point, I burned my hand on the steam wand and didn't even care. I just kept going. That day, I sold out of everything by noon. Every pastry, every bag of beans, every ounce of energy I had left. When I finally locked the door, I sat down on the floor and laughed until I cried. It didn't stop there. The post kept spreading. Bigger food pages reposted it, people tagged their friends, and suddenly my 10 square meters cafe became a little internet sensation. I woke up to dozens of new followers every morning, and a line at the door before I even opened. It was surreal. The same tiny space people used to laugh at now looked magical. The sunlight hit just right. The chalkboard menu seemed charming instead of cheap, and my cardboard open sign looked like part of the aesthetic. But with attention came pressure. I was still a one-woman show. I prepped at 5 a.m., opened at 7, closed at 5, and cleaned until midnight. My hands were blistered, my back ached, and my mind ran on caffeine and adrenaline. I loved every second of it, but I was burning out. I started turning away customers because I couldn't keep up. Some complained online about the wait time. I wanted to scream, "It's just me!" But instead, I smiled, apologized, and tried harder the next day. Money started coming in, not much, but enough to pay rent comfortably for the first time. I upgraded my equipment, added more menu options, and finally bought a proper sign for the window. Little Bean Café. I remember hanging it up myself, staring at those words, and feeling something shift inside me. Pride. Not arrogance, but genuine pride. My friends, the same ones who used to make jokes, started dropping by. They'd say things like, "Wow, I always knew you'd make it." I'd just smile. I didn't need to remind them of what they said before. Success has a way of silencing the noise. But it wasn't all picture perfect. Behind every Instagram photo, There was chaos. My tiny kitchen wasn't built for this kind of volume. I'd run out of milk mid-morning, sprint across the street to the grocery store, and come back with arms full of cartons while customers waited. The espresso machine overheated constantly. There were days I wanted to close early and just cry in the bathroom. Still, people kept coming. Regulars brought friends, co-workers, dates. A few even brought me small gifts, a mug, a plant, a handwritten note that said, "Thank you for making mornings better." I taped that note to the wall behind the counter. On bad days, it reminded me why I started. As weeks passed, the buzz grew louder. Local newspapers wrote articles. A morning news show did a quick segment. One afternoon, a reporter asked me, "How does it feel to be the most popular coffee shop in town?" I laughed and said, "It feels like I'm living someone else's life." But it was mine. All of it, the exhaustion, the joy, the disbelief, it was mine. There was a moment that defined it for me. A Saturday morning. The lines stretched down the block. The sun was spilling over the awning, and the smell of espresso filled the air. I looked out at all those people, strangers, waiting patiently just to taste something I made, and for the first time, I let myself believe. I did it. Of course. Success brings its own kind of loneliness. I didn't have time for much else. My friends hung out without me. I stopped dating. I missed birthdays, skipped dinners, ignored calls. My world had shrunk down to 10 square meters and a heartbeat of coffee steam. But it was okay. For once, I wasn't chasing someone else's expectations. I was building something real. Then one day, I noticed a familiar face in line. It was one of the guys who used to mock me the most. He was waiting with his girlfriend, holding her hand, smiling like nothing ever happened. When he finally got to the counter, he looked at me and said, "I've heard so much about this place." I just nodded, took his order, and handed him his coffee. He didn't recognize the quiet satisfaction behind my smile. But I didn't need him to. I wasn't there to prove him wrong anymore. I was there to keep proving myself right. As the months went on, business kept booming. People started asking when I'd expand, maybe open a second location, maybe hire a team. I told them, maybe someday. But deep down, I wasn't sure. There was something sacred about that small space, about the fact that I knew every inch of it, every sound, every scent. It was imperfect, yes, but it was alive. Still, the exhaustion was catching up to me. My body was tired, my mind frayed, and my savings, even though growing, weren't enough for the next big step. I started wondering, what comes after a miracle? That question haunted me. Because sometimes success isn't about getting there, it's about figuring out what to do once you have. And just as I was starting to feel that quiet fear again, something unexpected happened. An email that would change everything. The email came on a Sunday night, the kind of quiet evening when the city felt half asleep and the rain painted soft streaks down my window. I was too tired to check my inbox, but the subject line caught my eye. Partnership proposal. Expansion opportunity. At first, I thought it was spam, but then I read it. A well-known restaurant group wanted to meet. They'd seen the articles, the social media buzz, and the endless line outside my tiny cafe. They said they loved my brand, the Little Bean Charm, as they called it. They wanted to invest, open multiple locations, help me scale up across the city. I sat there, staring at the screen, half excited and half terrified. This was everything people dream of, right? The big break, the moment you make it. And yet, I didn't feel joy. I felt something else, hesitation. For a few days, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying what life had been before all this, the long nights, the paint-stained hands, the sound of that first espresso shot dripping into a cup. That was where it began. That was what made it special. I wasn't sure if I was ready to let someone else take a piece of it. But I went to the meeting anyway. They greeted me with smiles, firm handshakes, and numbers that made my head spin. They talked about branding, packaging, franchise potential, things I'd only seen in business magazines. They said I'd keep creative control, but I knew how those words worked. Creative control always had an expiration date. They wanted my name, my story, my face. They wanted to turn my 10-square-meter miracle into a product. I listened politely, nodded where I was supposed to, and took the contract home to think about it. That night, I sat alone in my cafe long after closing. The lights were dim. The air still smelled like coffee and cinnamon. And the city outside was quiet. I thought about what it would mean: more money, more reach, more everything. But also, less of me. This tiny place had become my world. It had heard my laughter, my tears, my failures, and my triumphs. Every scratch on the counter, every dent in the espresso machine, every note from a customer taped to the wall, they told my story better than any contract ever could. Still, the offer lingered in my mind. I could finally afford help. I could hire people, take a break, maybe even travel. For a moment, I let myself imagine it a chain of little bean cafes across the country, each one clean and modern, with staff, uniforms, and polished branding. But when I pictured it, something inside me felt hollow. Because deep down, I didn't start this for fame or fortune. I started it to feel alive again. The next morning, I went back to work as usual. The line was already forming before I opened. The same familiar faces, the same smell of roasted beans, the same old squeak of the door. A woman came in with her daughter, maybe 6 years old, and said it had become their Saturday ritual. She calls this place the Happy Shop, she told me. I smiled, and something in my heart settled. That evening, I wrote back to the investors. I thanked them for their generous offer, and I declined. When I hit send, a wave of calm washed over me. It wasn't regret. It wasn't fear. It was clarity. I knew who I was. And I finally understood that success isn't about how big you grow. It's about how true you stay to what started it all. Of course, not everyone agreed. My friends said I was crazy. You could have been a millionaire, one told me. Maybe I could have. But I didn't want to be a millionaire with an empty soul. I wanted to be the woman who built something honest, something that made people feel seen. Weeks turned into months, and the buzz around my cafe eventually quieted. The lines got shorter. The hype faded a little, and I was okay with that. What stayed was the community, the regulars, the morning smiles, the sense of belonging. The shop wasn't a viral sensation anymore. It was something better. It was home. Then one day, I got a letter in the mail. It was handwritten, from a young woman who lived 3 states away. She said she'd read about my story online and that it gave her the courage to start her own small bakery. She ended it with one line that brought tears to my eyes. Your little cafe made me believe that small dreams still matter. I kept that letter. It sits next to the register, framed in a piece of driftwood I found near the pier. Every time I look at it, I'm reminded that what I built isn't just a shop, it's a message. A few months ago, I made a small change. I added a sign above the counter. It says, "Small space, big heart." People smile when they read it, take pictures, post them online. Sometimes they tag me, and I see comments like, "This place feels like love in a cup." Those words mean more than any contract ever could. There are still hard days, mornings, when the coffee burns, or the bills pile up, or my body aches from standing too long. But even on the worst days, I'm grateful, because I'm still here, doing what I love, in the same 10 square meters that everyone once mocked. I think about that a lot, how easy it is for people to laugh at your dreams when they can't see the picture in your head. They see the smallness, the flaws, the risk, but they don't see the fire. And maybe that's okay, because dreams don't need approval to be real. They just need courage. Sometimes customers ask me if I ever plan to expand. I always smile and say, not yet. Maybe one day, when it feels right. But for now, I love hearing the sound of the bell on my tiny door, the hum of the espresso machine, and the quiet joy of knowing that every cup I make still matters. The same people who once laughed at me still come by sometimes. They don't say much. They just order their coffee, wait in line, and take a seat by the window. And I serve them with the same kindness as anyone else, not out of spite, but out of peace. Because I've learned that revenge isn't served cold, it's served warm, in a cup of good coffee, with a steady smile. I may not own a chain. I may never make $1 million. But I own my story, every failure, every bruise, every success. And that, to me, is more than enough. Pause. Everyone mocked my Bean Café. Now they're all lining up. And honestly, I don't blame them.